I see people talking about like the reasons why they use generative AI writing tools. This is one of the things that I hear a lot is like, I use it to plot because I don't know what happens next. The thing about writing is that this is part of writing. Like this is part of learning how to write. Hi, hello, it is a new year. Let's talk about our writing goals and how we're going to achieve them. If you're new here, my name is Kris. I am a science fiction fantasy author. I don't want to ever make writing sound like a race. I don't want to make it sound like, you know, finishing a book or publishing a book should always be your ultimate goal. Writing is creative expression. If you like to start a bunch of books, you have no particular aspirations to publish and you just write for fun, that is totally valid. This video is for people who maybe do want to hit some publishing targets this year. Maybe you're just, you know, trying to finish your first book just to finish it. The number one thing would be to minimize the amount of times that you find yourself comparing yourself to other writers. So if that means like seriously stepping back from social media, if at any point watching writing content creators feels demotivating instead of inspiring and motivating, then stop watching those videos. You know, I think one of the things that always made me feel very dejected, especially last year, was when I was seeing a lot of my peers putting out multiple books a year or announcing multiple books as they were promoting their debut, myself feeling like I was very behind. But a lot of these goalposts are just like completely out of your control, and everyone's writing journey is going to be different. It is never worthwhile to spend so much time using other people's benchmarks to compare your own like milestones, because everyone has different lives. You don't know who is writing full time. A lot of these things, you know, don't reflect on your skill or your talent. A lot of it is circumstance and luck. And, you know, I spent a couple weeks just like offline. So around the holidays and into the new year, just let myself write without logging onto Instagram. And I did feel a lot more connected to my work. I've made a YouTube video about this in the past, about like being a writing content creator and this idea of like writing as performance and wanting to be seen writing rather than being a writer and actually writing. And I think there's this like disconnect sometimes with how romantic the life seems versus what it's like to actually just sit at your desk and figure shit out. You know? When people aren't as candid about that difficult part, it can feel like you're doing something wrong. If you compare like my Instagram versus my YouTube, on Instagram, you just like, you see all the happy stuff. Wow, my book was featured in the New York Times book review. That is like such a different experience than like what you will see here on YouTube, where you just like watch my writing vlogs and I am so tired and I'm writing at 4 a.m. and I want to give up. And so I think it's important to remember that this stuff that you're seeing online isn't encompassing of the actual full journey. Next, you will hear a lot of writers talk about this, but finishing a book is 99% of the time about habit building. The way that I became very serious about my writing, I lived by this mantra: writing a few words a day is better than writing 0 words. I would really force myself to at least 4 to 5 times a week, but you can always adjust it. But for me, I would say like 4 to 5 times a week after work or during my lunch break, I would force myself to write. Even if it was just one sentence, writing that one sentence for me was like better than not touching the draft, not reading over the draft at all. Writing a book is the kind of thing where it's not going to happen overnight, but in order for it to happen, you do have to put in a little bit of work every day instead of like just trying to bang out 10,000 words in a single day. So on the days where I really do not feel like writing, I always force myself to at least read over the scene that I wrote yesterday. A lot of the times I can't stop myself from just editing. I'll do a little bit of editing and then I'll get to the scene that I'm not finished yet. I will have usually entered a flow state at that point. It's like, okay, I'm already in it and I can just keep going. I find that when it comes to writing, especially a project as long as a book. 50% of the battle is literally just getting your ass down into your chair and focusing. My next tip is to have time-based goals over word count goals. And I have really started to think about this, particularly in the past year. I think I was listening to one of Jenny's videos, also known as This Story Ain't Over. And one of the things that she was talking about with incorporating reading back into her life was that she doesn't think about her reading goals as like pages read, but time spent reading. And I think that's a really healthy way of looking at writing goals as well. And it's also something that I have tried to like change my mindset about, where I don't really think about my writing goals as like, I need to write 1,000 words this afternoon. It's I have a block of like 4 hours today, and I can write for 2 hours in the afternoon and 2 hours in the evening. And that has really helped me feel just like a lot less pressure. Again, because I am such a slow writer and I tend to edit as I write. So I'll be cutting words as I'm writing. And so using word count goals just doesn't really work for me. And I think it's also easier to fit writing into your schedule when you're thinking of it less as like something that needs to be done and more like, this is how I'm going to spend this hour of my day. My next tip is to write poorly. And I know that this is a tip that a lot of people struggle with. It's one that I struggle with a lot. I really can't get into a scene if the line level writing is like absolute dog shit. There are some days where I really can do it. Like I just like don't think about the sentences. I just write the scene to write it, especially if there's a lot of action in the scene. I can kind of force myself to just power through it and not care too much about the sentences. But there are some days where it's much harder for me to do that. And on those days, I try to adapt the dialogue first method. This is something that I talk about a lot on this channel. I have a whole separate video about it if you want more of my in-depth thoughts on it. Essentially, it is exactly what it sounds like. If there is a scene that has multiple characters, and if that scene has a good amount of dialogue, usually just write out all the dialogue first, like a script. I don't even bother with dialogue tags. Usually I myself can keep track of who is talking. I don't put in any descriptions. I find that in dialogue heavy scenes, when I write the dialogue first, it gives me a skeleton. It gives me a way to get over the hump of a blank page so that when I go back to the scene, it's like I'm not starting on a blank page. Sometimes with this method, what can happen is your dialogue becomes very heavy-handed because you're writing it out first and you're just trying to get the information on the page. You can always like edit that out. You can take some stuff that's said aloud and just put it in a character's head instead. That's what editing is for. When it comes to just getting the words down onto the page, you really have to let go of your perfectionism. Now that I'm on my 4th book, and especially now that I've gone through the entire publishing process once before, I know now how much actually changes in editing. And I do find that in drafting now, I feel a lot more comfortable not being so precious about my line level writing, because I have confidence in my editing process. I have confidence that I will fix it later. I think a lot of the times getting to the end of a book is just being able to build the trust and confidence in yourself that you will be able to make it to the end. I think a lot of the reasons why I failed to finish a lot of manuscripts, when I was younger, I didn't trust that I was good enough. And that's okay if that's how you feel, because it takes time to get there. It takes time to build your confidence. Don't be so hard on yourself if it feels like your output is very, very slow. So for my next tip, this is kind of multiple points, but this is for when you are stuck. I am a plotter, so I tend to know what's going to happen in my book before I even start writing it, but you are still going to hit roadblocks where something happens and you're like, how do I get the characters out of this? Or where do they go between point A and point B? If you're ever stuck in your plot, some of the things that I do to get myself out of it, number one of the first things that I will do is I will reread the book from the top. This usually gets me back into the flow of the story and reminding myself what is happening. Again, I write in science fiction and fantasy, so my books tend to be a little bit longer. If I take even a few days break from the draft, sometimes I forget what's happening. Rereading your book as a reader would read it kind of gets me back in to the flow state. If that doesn't work, number 2 thing that I would recommend is to kind of take inventory of what is happening in the chapters leading up to the chapter that you're writing. I do this a lot with myself. Sometimes I'll write it down. Sometimes I'll just say it out loud, or sometimes I'll just do it in my head. The reason that I recommend doing this aloud, like actually trying to articulate it, is because sometimes you as the writer think you know what's going on and you think you know all the details. But then if you imagine someone actually asking you what is happening in this chapter, what is happening in this section of the book, and you force yourself to actually list out the plot events, I find sometimes that when you do that, you realize, wait, I actually don't know why the character is doing that. This is even better if you can do it with someone else. Have another writing friend or a critique partner. I would highly recommend doing this with them. I do this a lot with my brother. He will hear me talking about the plot sometimes and then be like, what if the characters did this? Or why are the characters making those decisions? So this is an exercise in really understanding your plot and where the pressure points are. If the world makes sense, if the lore makes sense. It also is one of those things where the more that you write, the better your gut will be trained as to like how to actually plot together interesting beats. I find sometimes when I see people talking about like the reasons why they use ChatGPT or other writing tool or other generative AI writing tools. This is one of the things that I hear a lot is like, I use it to plot because I don't know what happens next in my book. And the thing about writing is that this is part of writing. Like this is part of learning how to write. If every time you get stuck, you just like ask for like a whole plethora of ideas, you're never going to actually learn how to plot. I don't actually get stuck as much anymore. I can feel instinctively now, in a way that I couldn't before, how to write myself out of holes. As I am reading, I can understand and remember and see the threads of like where character arcs or thematic beats are overlapping and how that can translate into a scene that can strengthen a plot beat, for example, or strengthen the emotional impact of a scene. No, this is a separate conversation to have, really. Like, I won't get into all of this in this video, but if you are someone who's like, this is what I use ChatGPT for, I would strongly encourage not doing that and really honing your own intuition. Writing is like any skill and it requires practice. And just because you feel like you're getting stuck now, it doesn't mean that you'll never develop the skill the more that you practice. But if you don't practice, you never will develop that skill. And my last tip, which arguably is the most important one, is to remember why you're writing. Writing a book is going to take a long time. Not everyone can do it in the span of 1 month, 2 months. And in that process, it is going to be so easy to give up. I genuinely believe that the main thing that is going to get you over the finish line is to be obsessed with your work and to have a reason to hold on to when it gets tough. For different writers, this is going to look very differently. One thing that I have talked about in previous videos is that I feel like for every book, I always have a mission statement. This is the reason that I'm telling the story. So for my debut, I wanted to write a book that both honored and challenged the legacy of a classic like The Great Gatsby, while also being this reflection of where we are as a society as it relates to our relationship with technology, the way it affects our relationships with others, what kind of society are we moving toward? Is that the world that we want to live in? But again, with my current book, I have very specific things that I want to say, and hanging on to those reasons is part of what helps me continue to be obsessed with the work. So find what those reasons are. I would recommend that those reasons be internal. An internal reason is what I have described to you. I feel like this is an important story for me to tell, and I feel creatively and emotionally fulfilled through telling it. That's an internal reason. External reasons could be, I want to be a published author, which is a totally fine reason. And if that really works for you, if it gets you to the finish line, that's great. The only thing that I caution with that is that external reasons are things that you truly cannot control. You can't control whether or not this book gets you an agent or whether it sells on sub. That can really crush your relationship with the project. If you can find an internal reason to love your book, to be obsessed with it, then that's what I would would recommend, and that is what has worked for me. I know not everyone likes to talk about their projects as they're writing them, which is totally fine, but if you're someone who likes to, build community and have other people be excited for your book as you're writing it, that can really, really help with motivation as well. So that takes us to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. My debut novel, Local Heavens, is available now wherever you buy your books. That is all. Thank you for watching this video. I hope all of your writing projects are going well, and I will see you guys in the next video.